More on the state's attempt to demonize opposition under the guise of conspiracy theorists and a host of other labels. We turn now to Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes, also a constitutional lawyer and has many other credits to his name. Stewart, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, we were just covering one historical example of, in this case, the State Department trying to demonize conspiracy theorists, but it's part of a larger pattern we've seen where people like White House information czar Cass Sunstein have openly written papers talking about even outlawing conspiracy theorists, talking about infiltrating groups that have views counter to the state and a whole lot more. Are we saying this kind of thing playing out now as they continue to demonize patriot groups like the one you founded, groups like Occupy Wall Street, and everything else going on in the current spectrum of political activity?
Well, sure. It's all part of an information war. That's what you guys are calling InfoWars, right? So it's the same thing that's been going on for a long time. They have managed to monopolize the media. When I was a kid, there was only NBC, ABC, CBS, etc. And now they have to compete with us on the internet. It's kind of like our printing press. And so it's a powerful tool. And so they know that the truth is, it's the dagger in the vampire's heart. And so the only way they could possibly fight us is not to, attack the truth, because that just brings the truth out. So instead of demonize us, as Brandon Smith said in his interview earlier, they just attack your character and try to make you marginalized in the eyes of the viewers and listeners so they won't listen to you. It's not working, though. Every time they write an article demonizing us, all it does is bring more attention to us. It's free advertising. So I think it's kind of funny in a way that they keep attacking us like this, because the more they attack us, the more we know we're the right target.
Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, Occupy Wall Street continues to be one of the big stories throughout the year as people, as we discussed before getting ready for this interview, that they have a righteous anger and they may or may not understand the right solutions, but they definitely have a right to free speech. And we've seen an attempt to clamp down on that free speech nonetheless through local ordinances, petty laws written to fight things like drug dealing, when obviously there is a First Amendment right to free speech.
Well, absolutely right. And whatever the validity of any of these ordinances against overnight camping or whatever, when they're first drafted, now they're being used to stifle political speech, which is, core political speech is considered by the Supreme Court to be the very zenith of protected free speech. And so, like I told one person in Sacramento who was opposed to the protesters there being able to stay overnight in the Cedar Chavez Park. He said, well, he's worried about anarchists coming in from Seattle and causing trouble. I said, well, then you arrest the anarchists when they show up and break windows or whatever. You arrest them. You don't stifle the free speech of peaceful protesters because of what you're worried about somebody, what they might do in the future. That would be, unconstitutional. That's prior restraint. You can't do that. So we have to be consistent, even if we think they're useful idiots or they're being manipulated by communists, which is somewhat true. I don't think it's fair to say that that's the case for all the protesters there. But even if you don't like their speech, it doesn't make a difference. In America, if you're going to defend the Constitution, you have to defend it all the time for everybody. It doesn't make a difference whether you like the speech or not. They have a right to free speech. And if you allow their free speech to be crushed because you don't like them, guess who's next? You. The same ordinances will be used against you. Don't think they won't.
So it was recently reported that not only did some 18 cities crack down on the local Occupy movements all at once, but this was apparently coordinated through Homeland Security. There were meetings with mayors and police chiefs across the country, and really the suggestion that Homeland Security was leading the march on this front. What do you make of that, Stewart?
Well, I mean, it shows two things. One is the degree to which local police now answer to Homeland Security, and they're now part of that octopus, unfortunately. But it also shows you that, we might be in for manipulation. This is what I really worry about, is that, constitutionalists should look at the big picture and say, okay, the power elites might be setting up a false paradigm for us. And that is that if you can get conservatives to cheer and support the cracking down by police on these protesters because they're leftists, then you wind up with the the conservatives and the constitutionalists of America protecting the status quo, which is fascism right now. This is not a free market. I mean, the socialists are stupid and wrong about their solutions. You know, Marxism and destroying the free market is not going to save us either. But what we have right now is not where you would have failures being allowed to fail. And so what we have is really fascism. So, but if the power elites can get conservatives and constitutionalists to defend the status quo and support the crackdown on these leftist protesters because they don't like, you know, Marxists, they still win. So they win either way. If there's a successful, you know, communist, which is not going to happen in America, but if that were to happen, they would still win because they would control the Politburo. But if they could get conservatives to defend the status quo and support the violation of free speech and cracking down with the police state, you know, coordinated through DHS suppression of the protesters, then the elites also win because they have now, you know, taken away the moral high ground of the Bill of Rights and thrown it in trash with conservative support. So either way, they win.
And as far as the larger economic fallout, the breakdown, they've tried to disguise the fact that it's a crony capitalist problem of these Wall Street figures, at least the nefarious ones, working with the Washington politicians that they bought out. I hate to sound too basic here, but didn't the founders warn us against this kind of thing? And what kind of solutions and recourses do we have?
Well, yeah, in their age, in their time, it was called mercantilism. It was the East India Company. You know, it was the cronyism back then. Today, I think the proper term for it is fascism. It's the marriage of big government and big business. And like Jerry Spence once described, it's like two, you know, copulating dogs in the street who are, you know, stuck together in their obscene enterprise. And that's what this is. It's big business and big government both sucking us dry and enslaving our children. And so let's call it what it is. It's fascism. Call it fascism.
Yeah. So it's also been reported there were a number of sheriffs in California, I think one in Oregon also, who began this other type of process of saying, no, we've had enough of this federal encroachment. We've had enough with the way Homeland Security and other agencies want to use disaster response, emergency preparedness to crack down on localities. Let's talk about some of those issues.
Well, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to see happening. And I give full credit to Sheriff Mack for making this happen. I think that he has lit a brush fire in the minds of sheriffs across the country. And we're now seeing the effect. And it's been, you know, somewhat of a delayed effect, but it's happening. Like the one sheriff said, you know, he's been enforcing the penal code for so long, but he never really understood his oath until now. I certainly hope that sticks and that keeps on snowballing and keeps on growing. This is where the focus of the freedom movement needs to be, is on local resistance at the county level and getting the sheriffs to do the right thing, and the same thing in the state level also. This should be the focus of effort, is standing up as counties, as towns, as states, and utilizing what's already there. These sheriffs are already there. The apparatus of the state is already there. Use it. That's the whole point of Oath Keepers, is to get those guys to take their oaths seriously and take the separation of powers between the federal government and the states seriously. And I think in California, the feds really overstepped. Drying out the entire farmland of California, killing their crops, was a huge overstep. And we're seeing the reaction now. I think those sheriffs are going to get a lot of support by their communities, from their communities. I'm interested to see what happens now. What's the feds' reaction going to be to these sheriffs standing up? You know, they're going to be probably going to start calling them racist. What else do they have? You know, so the sheriffs are standing up against a unconstitutional, an egregious federal trampling of the rights of the farmers in California by not giving them any water. And I think they're going to have a lot of support in their local communities for the sheriffs. And I'm kind of curious to see what the feds do in response.
Now, we spoke earlier with Brandon Smith of altmarket.com, and he was discussing his rebuttal to a Southern Poverty Law Center article which demonized yourself. You have the notoriety of having made the cover of their magazine, and many other patriots who've moved to Montana to try to pursue freedom, but instead you've been branded as neo-Nazis and racists. I mean, obviously they're afraid of the message you're trying to send out, to simply be constitutionally minded.
Well, they never directly call me a neo-Nazi or a racist. They know I would would sue them for libel successfully. What they do is they talk about me, and they talk about some neo-Nazi, and they talk about me some more, and so they create this false association in the minds of the reader, which only exists in the article. You know, I'm associated with neo-Nazis because they put me in an article along with neo-Nazis. That's the only real connection between us.
Well, sure, they have unrelated sentences side by side, but the implication is there, and the illustration on the cover of the magazine also helps hammer it home as though you're working with these neo-Nazis. But it's just kind of a tip of the hat to the fact that you've been effective in this work, and this particular entity, the SPLC, has just gone out of its way to try to brand any attempt to restore the Constitution as a type of racism.
And they're especially afraid of the idea that people in a state like Montana would stand up. I mean, Montana is the modern version of what Massachusetts was like in the time of the founding fathers of Boston. It is kind of a hotbed of you know, radical freedom thought, and so we are the modern counterpart. And so I think there's a good reason why they're focused on us. They're afraid of it. They're afraid of people in Montana asserting their sovereignty and standing up to the federal government. And they're afraid of people moving here, and my friend Smith, who talked earlier, and I, and along with Chuck Baldwin and others, have been encouraging liberty-minded people to, you know, move to Montana as kind of like a free state, or a free haven state. And so move here, and it's already got the climate of liberty, already got a spirit of independence and resistance here, and we're encouraging more folks to move here and make it even stronger. And I think that has a good chance of you know, being the spark. And look at Massachusetts during the Revolution. It was the hotbed and the spark. Then it spread through the rest of the colonies. And as a nation, as a young, you know, group of colonies and free states, they rebelled and asserted their liberty. And the same thing could happen here. You could have the Western states being the focal point for a new renaissance of liberty. But the founders, you know, showed us right in the Constitution itself that the answer is in the states. That's why we're so focused on state sovereignty. Nullification is the proper answer, as Jefferson and Madison pointed out in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. That is where our focus should be. I encourage people to really focus on your county sheriffs and your states, and strengthening your local communities, and getting strong enough to say no to federal money, but also strong enough to stand up and say no to federal edicts and commands. What are they going to do? I mean, really, they don't have enough federal officers to come into your state and enforce the laws all by themselves. They just don't have enough. They need the cooperation of local police, and if local police deny the cooperation, they're a paper tiger. What are they going to do then? Send the army in? Well, then the answer to that is to teach the Army about their responsibilities to not enter into a state with force and to not violate the Constitution.
Stewart Rhodes, oathkeepers.org, strong enough to say no. Thanks for joining us. And